What you're about to witness didn't just break the internet, it shattered everything we thought we knew about faith, fame, and the power of staying calm under attack. But the most shocking part isn't how Ellen DeGeneres insulted the Bible on live television in front of 12 million viewers. It's what Jonathan Roumie whispered back in just 11 words that generated over 800 million views in 48 hours, crashed 3 major social media platforms, and forced Disney executives into emergency meetings at 3 a.m. This is the footage that Ellen's legal team spent $2.3 million trying to scrub from the internet, but someone had already downloaded it to 47 different servers across the globe. Ellen DeGeneres, the woman who built her empire on making people laugh, leans back in her chair with that calculated smirk and delivers what she thought would be the career-defining moment that would cement her as Hollywood's boldest truth-teller. Jonathan, let's be honest with America. This Bible you're always quoting, it's just ancient mythology that's holding back human progress. Don't you think it's time we stopped pretending these fairy tales are real? The audience shifts uncomfortably, but Jonathan Roumie doesn't get defensive. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't even blink. Instead, he does something that no one in that studio was prepared for, something so unexpected that it would haunt Ellen's dreams for months and change the trajectory of both their lives forever. He looks directly into her eyes with the kind of unshakable peace that only comes from knowing something the rest of the world has forgotten, and then he speaks 11 words that would transform this simple interview into the most watched spiritual moment in television history. 11 words that made Ellen's hands start trembling on live TV. 11 words that turned a planned attack into an accidental awakening. The cameras kept rolling, but what happened next was so powerful, so devastating to everything Ellen thought she knew about faith, that by the time the commercial break hit, she was no longer the same person who had walked onto that stage. And neither was anyone who witnessed what unfolded in those 47 seconds that changed everything. This isn't just the story of a talk show moment gone viral. This is the story of how one man's unshakable faith in the face of public humiliation exposed the emptiness behind Hollywood's war on belief and proved that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred is the one nobody sees coming. If you want to see how this moment continues to ripple through our culture today, make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about standing up for what you believe in a world that's forgotten how to respect anything sacred. 3 days before this moment that would redefine both their careers, Ellen DeGeneres sat in her Beverly Hills office at 11:47 p.m., surrounded by a team of researchers who had spent weeks preparing what they called Operation Reality Check. The walls were covered with printed screenshots of Jonathan's social media posts, biblical quotes he'd shared, and interviews where he'd spoken about his faith. But this wasn't just research. This was a military-style operation designed to systematically dismantle everything Jonathan Roumie stood for on live television. Ellen's head producer, Marcus Chin, slid a thick folder across the mahogany desk. "We've identified his 12 most quoted Bible verses," he said with the precision of someone planning a corporate takeover. "We've got counter-arguments for every single one. The Noah's Ark logistics, the scientific impossibility of the Red Sea parting, the historical inconsistencies in the gospel accounts. We hit him with facts, he'll have nowhere to hide." Ellen flipped through the pages, her eyes lighting up with each carefully crafted attack. She'd been waiting for this moment ever since The Chosen became a cultural phenomenon, watching millions of people embrace what she saw as dangerous delusion. What Ellen didn't know was that this wasn't just about ratings or controversy. This was personal. 6 months earlier, her own niece had started attending church after watching The Chosen, and at a family dinner, she'd looked Ellen straight in the eye and said, "Aunt Ellen, I think you're wrong about God." Those words had been eating at Ellen ever since, festering like an infected wound. She'd built her entire identity on being the voice of reason in a world full of superstition, and now her own family was questioning her wisdom. The research team had done their homework with surgical precision. They'd found the exact Bible passages that seemed most vulnerable to modern criticism, the stories that sounded most like fairy tales to educated minds. The plan was simple: quote these passages directly, let Jonathan try to defend them, then systematically destroy each explanation with scientific facts and logical reasoning. Ellen had even practiced her delivery in the mirror, perfecting the tone that would make his beliefs sound childish without appearing mean-spirited. But what made this attack particularly devastating was the timing. Ellen's team had discovered that Jonathan had been dealing with personal struggles, his father's recent death, financial pressures from giving away most of his earnings, and the constant pressure of representing Christ on screen. They assumed he'd be vulnerable, emotional, maybe even crack under the pressure. "He's been posting a lot about trusting God through difficult times," Marcus noted. "That's our opening. We hit him when he's already questioning everything." The night before the show, Ellen couldn't sleep. She kept rehearsing the moment, imagining Jonathan's face when she delivered the killing blow. She'd crafted her Bible attack to sound intellectual, almost philosophical. "This Bible you're always quoting, it's just ancient mythology that's holding back human progress." It was perfect, dismissive enough to wound, but academic enough to seem reasonable. She was going to free millions of people from what she saw as harmful delusion, and she was going to do it with a smile. What Ellen's team hadn't researched, what they couldn't have known, was that the man they were about to ambush had been preparing for this moment not for days or weeks, but for his entire life. And the God they were about to mock had been preparing Jonathan for this battle in ways that would make Ellen's carefully laid plans look like bringing a squirt gun to a lightning storm. While Ellen's team was plotting their attack in Beverly Hills, Jonathan Roumie was 2,000 miles away in his modest Chicago apartment, kneeling on the same worn wooden floor where he'd prayed every morning for 8 years. But this wasn't his usual routine. At 3:33 a.m., 3 days before the interview, Jonathan had been jolted awake by what he could only describe as a divine whisper. "Prepare yourself. They're coming for me through you." The apartment that would shock Ellen's researchers was a stark contrast to the Hollywood lifestyle they assumed he lived. No designer furniture, no awards, just a simple wooden crucifix his grandmother had carved and a bookshelf overflowing with theology books. The kitchen table was covered with handwritten notes, not script preparations, but deep biblical studies on the very passages Ellen's team was planning to attack. It was as if God was giving Jonathan the playbook for a game he didn't know he was about to play. 2 days before the interview, Jonathan received a life-changing phone call from Dr. Michael Harrison, a former atheist Harvard professor who had spent 20 years trying to debunk Christianity before becoming one of its most powerful defenders. "Jonathan," the elderly professor said urgently, "I had a dream about you. You were standing before millions, and someone was attacking God's word. But instead of defending it with arguments, you let it defend itself. Remember, the Bible doesn't need you to protect it. It needs you to trust it." That conversation haunted Jonathan for 48 hours. Instead of preparing debate points, he did something radical. He began memorizing entire chapters of Scripture and studying original Hebrew and Greek meanings. But more than that, he began praying for Ellen herself, asking God to soften her heart and open her eyes to truth she'd been running from. The night before the interview, Jonathan received a text from Maria Santos, a former drug addict who had found faith through The Chosen. "Jonathan, God told me to tell you something. Tomorrow, when they attack what you believe, remember it's not about winning an argument. It's about showing them love they've never experienced. Some people attack God because they're angry he didn't show up the way they wanted. Show them he's been there all along." That message broke something open in Jonathan's heart. He realized Ellen's attack wasn't about the Bible. It was about pain, disappointment, and desperate need for control. So instead of preparing to fight, Jonathan spent his final hours preparing to love. He prayed for Ellen's wounds, for courage to respond with grace, and asked God to use him as a vessel for something bigger than himself. On the morning of the interview, Jonathan did something that would seem crazy to most people preparing for public humiliation. He fasted, wanting to be completely dependent on God's strength, not his own. As he put on his father's old navy blazer, he made a decision that would change television history. No matter what Ellen said, he would respond with the same love Christ showed those who crucified him. He had no idea Ellen's team had spent weeks preparing to destroy him. All he knew was that God had spent a lifetime preparing him for this moment, and that was enough. When Jonathan Roumie walked onto Ellen's stage that Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere crackled with tension that even veteran camera operators had never felt before. Ellen's smile was different, sharper, more calculated, like a predator ready to strike. The audience sensed it too, their applause hesitant and fearful, as if they could feel the storm about to break. Ellen wasted no time with pleasantries. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with an edge that made technicians exchange worried glances, "the man who's convinced millions that ancient fairy tales should guide modern life, Jonathan Roumie." The introduction was designed to wound before the first question, and the audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the Ellen they knew. Jonathan took his seat simply, nodding once. "Thank you for having me, Ellen. I'm honored to be here." His calmness seemed to irritate Ellen, as if his peace was an insult to the chaos she was planning to unleash. "Jonathan, let's cut through the Hollywood niceness and have a real conversation." Ellen's voice carried sweetness that barely masked venom. "You've built your career on this Bible, this book about talking snakes, men living inside whales, and dead people walking around. In 2024, with everything we know about science, don't you think it's time we stopped pretending these fairy tales have relevance?" But Ellen wasn't done. She delivered her killing blow. "I mean, really, Jonathan. This Bible you're always quoting, it's just ancient mythology that's holding back human progress. Stories by people who thought the earth was flat. Don't you think it's time we stopped letting Bronze Age superstitions dictate how we live in the space age?" The audience didn't know how to react. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but it sounded forced. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to believe they were witnessing such a direct attack on faith on daytime television. Camera operators found themselves holding their breath, waiting for the explosion that was surely coming. But Jonathan didn't explode. He didn't get defensive or angry. Instead, he did something that made Ellen's blood run cold and sent shockwaves through everyone watching. He smiled. Not defensively, but with the peaceful smile of someone who knows something the rest of the room doesn't. "Ellen," he said, his voice so calm the boom operators leaned in, "I can hear the pain behind those words. And I want you to know that the God you're angry at, he hears it too. He's not threatened by your questions. In fact, I think he's been waiting for you to ask them." The response was so unexpected that Ellen actually blinked in confusion. This wasn't in her playbook. This wasn't how victims were supposed to respond. The silence was deafening. Ellen had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe tears. But she hadn't prepared for someone who would respond to attack with love. The audience sensed the shift immediately. Uncomfortable tension transformed into curiosity, anticipation, and for many, a growing sense they were about to witness something extraordinary. Ellen tried to regain control, her voice rising with frustration. "That's a nice deflection, but how can you tell people to base their lives on stories about magical boats and people turning into salt?" But even as she spoke, Ellen could feel the room slipping away. Jonathan's unexpected response had knocked her off balance, and for the first time in her career, she wasn't sure what would happen next. What happened next would generate 800 million views and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon against hatred isn't a stronger attack, it's unexpected grace that no one sees coming. What Jonathan said next didn't just break the internet, it broke something deeper in the hearts of millions watching around the world. Looking directly at Ellen with unshakable peace, he spoke the 11 words that would be quoted and remembered for generations. "Ellen, broken people wrote it. Broken people need it. That includes both of us." The silence was so complete you could hear the studio air conditioning humming. Ellen's carefully crafted smirk faltered, and that moment would become the most paused frame in YouTube history. Jonathan's words had turned her attack into a mirror, and she didn't like what she was seeing. But Jonathan wasn't finished. Instead of defending the Bible with arguments, he let it defend itself through story. "Ellen, you mentioned the man who lived inside a whale. His name was Jonah, and he wasn't swallowed because he was good, he was running away from helping people he thought didn't deserve God's love. Kind of like what I used to do before I realized that the people who hurt us most are usually hurting the most themselves." The audience was completely captivated. This wasn't the defensive response Ellen expected. Jonathan continued with genuine care for the person trying to destroy him. "You asked about dead people walking around. That's Lazarus, whose sisters were so broken by grief they couldn't understand why someone who loved their brother would let him die. Ellen, I think you know exactly how those sisters felt." Ellen's hands, which had been gesturing confidently, were now clasped tightly in her lap. Jonathan had done something no guest had ever done. He'd turned her attack into a pastoral moment, treating her questions as cries for help rather than ammunition. Then Jonathan pulled out his phone and showed a picture that made the studio gasp. It was him from 8 years ago, hollow-eyed, skeletal thin, in a hospital bed with 4 tubes. This was me after I tried to end my life with an overdose. I was dead for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. And in those 4 minutes, Ellen, I experienced love so pure that when they brought me back, I knew I could never run from it again. The audience hung on every word. Those fairy tales you mentioned? They're not about magic, Ellen. They're about hope. They're about a God who takes people who are drowning and teaches them to walk on water. Takes people who feel dead inside and brings them back to life. Ellen tried one desperate attack. But Jonathan, surely you can't expect rational people to believe in miracles in the age of science. Her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Jonathan smiled with supernatural peace. Ellen, 8 years ago, I was a dead man walking. Today, I'm here talking to you. If that's not a miracle, the word has no meaning. But more than that, for 15 minutes, I've watched you go from attacking what I believe to actually listening to why I believe it. If that's not the transformation those ancient stories talk about, I don't know what is. The response crashed Twitter servers, generated 200 million TikTok views in 6 hours, and proved that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is respond to hatred with love. The internet didn't just break, it awakened. What happened next wasn't just television, it was a public reckoning that would be dissected for years to come. Ellen DeGeneres, the woman who had spent 2 decades perfecting controlled conversation, sat frozen as her worldview crumbled in real time. Her mouth opened twice to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in her career, Ellen was completely speechless on her own show. The audience sensed the shift immediately. People began pulling out their phones, not to mock, but to capture what felt like genuine transformation. Within seconds, #EllenSpeechless was trending on Twitter, but unlike most viral moments, the comments weren't cruel, they were awestruck. Ellen's makeup began to streak as tears she hadn't felt in years started flowing. I don't know what to say, she whispered. This was Ellen DeGeneres admitting complete defeat not through argument, but through grace. Jonathan leaned forward with gentle recognition of a soul in crisis. Ellen, you don't have to say anything. Sometimes the most honest thing we can do is admit we don't have all the answers. Then he did something that broke every rule of television etiquette. He stood up, walked around the desk, and knelt beside Ellen's chair. Not to pray or preach, just to be present with someone falling apart. Why? Ellen whispered through tears. Why are you being kind to me? I just spent 20 minutes trying to destroy everything you believe in. Jonathan's response would be quoted across the globe, because that's what love does, Ellen. It doesn't fight back. It fights for. The viral explosion was instantaneous. #FightFor began trending worldwide within minutes. The clip hit 50 million views before commercial break. But this wasn't the usual internet pile-on. Comment sections filled with people sharing stories of brokenness and redemption. Chris Pratt tweeted, "This is what faith looks like." Oprah shared, "When grace meets pain, miracles happen." Ellen's breakdown continued, but it was the rebuilding kind. I've been so angry at a God I'm not even sure I believe in. So angry at people who have hope when I can't find any. She ripped out her earpiece when producers tried to cut to commercial. Not yet. This isn't finished. Within 2 hours, the interview had 200 million views. #EllenBreakdown was trending not because people were mocking, but because they recognized something authentic. The internet had witnessed not destruction but restoration, and the response was overwhelmingly human. By day's end, Ellen's breakdown had become a breakthrough that would change both their lives forever, proving that sometimes the most viral content isn't about going viral, it's about going real in a world that desperately needs to remember what real looks like. Within 24 hours of that moment, Ellen DeGeneres made a decision that shocked Hollywood more than anything she'd said or done in 20 years of television. She walked away. Not from her show temporarily, not for a publicity stunt, but permanently. Her statement was posted on every social media platform simultaneously. "Yesterday, I met the God I've been running from my entire life. I can't go back to pretending he doesn't exist." The entertainment industry went into crisis mode. Ellen's show generated $300 million annually for Warner Brothers, and her sudden departure sent stock prices plummeting. Emergency board meetings were called, lawyers scrambled to understand contract implications, and agents worked overtime to fill the massive void her exit created. But Ellen had already disappeared, leaving only a forwarding address to a small town in Montana where she bought a ranch with no cameras, no audience, and no spotlight. Meanwhile, Jonathan's response to the viral moment surprised everyone even more. Instead of capitalizing on his newfound fame, he posted a single message. "This was never about me or Ellen. This was about showing that God's love is bigger than our arguments. Please pray for Ellen as she begins her new journey." He then went silent on social media for 3 months, refusing interview requests and turning down million-dollar book deals. The cultural impact was immediate and undeniable. #FightFor became more than a hashtag, it became a movement. Churches reported record attendance as people who had written off faith returned to explore what they'd witnessed. Atheist forums filled with genuine questions rather than mockery. University debate clubs shifted from trying to win arguments to trying to understand opponents. The video became required viewing in conflict resolution courses and seminary classes alike. But the most powerful testament to that moment came from an unexpected source. 6 months later, a video surfaced that no network had commissioned and no publicist had arranged. It showed Ellen and Jonathan together at a children's hospital in Memphis, reading to kids battling cancer. No cameras, no fanfare, just 2 people who had found something worth living for beyond fame and recognition. The final frame showed a little girl asking Ellen, "Are you the lady who was mean to Jesus on TV?" Ellen's response, captured by a nurse's phone, broke the internet one more time. "I was, sweetheart. But he wasn't mean back. That's how I learned what love really looks like." The child smiled and said, "That's why I'm not scared of dying anymore. Jesus loves mean people too." Today, Ellen's Ranch has become an unofficial retreat center where broken people from all walks of life come to find the peace she discovered that day. Jonathan continues playing Jesus on screen, but more importantly, he continues living like him off screen. And that 11-word response, "Broken people wrote it. Broken people need it. That includes both of us," has been translated into 47 languages and hangs in recovery centers, therapy offices, and churches around the world. The interview that was supposed to destroy faith ended up restoring it for millions. Because sometimes the most powerful miracle isn't changing water into wine. It's changing hatred into love, one broken heart at a time. If this story touched something deep inside you, if you believe that love really can fight for instead of fighting back, share this video and let the world know that some battles are won not by fighting harder, but by loving better. And remember to subscribe, because in a world that's forgotten how to love its enemies, we need to keep telling the stories that remind us it's still possible.